The note showed up on a Tuesday. Just a slip of white paper tucked under my windshield wiper, folded once. I knew what it was before I opened it. Mr. Griffith, third notice. Contact our office within 72 hours to arrange payment or surrender. James Soto, Regional Recovery Specialist, Regional Recovery Specialist. That's what they called repo guys now. I crumpled it and shoved it in my jacket pocket with the other two. Soto had been leaving them every few days for the past 2 weeks. The truck was 12 years old and worth maybe $4,000 if I lied about the mileage. I owed $6,300 on a consolidation loan I took out last year when things got tight. Things stayed tight. I needed work, the kind that paid up front. I used to have better options. 2 years ago, I was working as an EMT in Knoxville, pulling doubles at the county service, decent pay and benefits. I was good at it too. Stayed calm when things went bad, knew my protocols, didn't freeze up when someone was bleeding out in the back of the rig. Then I lifted a stretcher wrong. Just once. Some guy who'd gone down hard at a construction site. Probably 260, dead weight. My partner had a bad grip and I compensated. Felt something pop low in my back right above my belt line. Thought it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. Took 3 months before I admitted I couldn't do the job anymore. Couldn't lift. Couldn't crouch and stand and haul equipment for 12-hour shifts. Went to 2 doctors. Both said the same thing. Rest it. Physical therapy. Maybe surgery if it got worse. I did the therapy until my savings ran out. The license lapsed 6 months later because I couldn't afford the renewal and couldn't pass the physical anyway. After that, it was whatever I could get. Delivery driving until gas ate the pay. Warehouse inventory until my back flared up again. A few security gigs that didn't last. I burned through every favor I had. Called old partners, former supervisors. People who said they'd help if I ever needed it. That well ran dry faster than I expected. So when Scott Noble called, I picked up. Scott was a recruiter. The contract kind. He had my number from some job board I'd signed up for and forgotten about. His voice was upbeat and fast, the kind of friendly that didn't mean anything. Clyde, hey, got something that might fit. Short-term contract, vendor work. You available nights? Depends on the pay. 15 an hour, overnight differential bumps it to 18. Week-to-week renewals if it goes well. Just basic site maintenance. Really low-impact stuff. I did the math in my head. 18 times 8 was 144 a night. 5 nights was 720 before taxes. Enough to get Soto off my back for a month. Maybe 2 if I kept my head down. What's the work? Crown Castle contract. They manage telecom infrastructure, cell towers, and relay sites. You'd be doing caretaker duty at a microwave site. Checking equipment, making sure nothing's offline, logging readings. Pretty straightforward. Where? Outside Burnsville, up near Mount Mitchell State Park. Remote site, so it's solo work. That a problem? Remote was fine. Solo was better. I didn't need supervision, and I didn't want witnesses if my back went out halfway through a shift. I can do it. Great. I'll send the vendor paperwork over today. Crown Castle's got their own onboarding, so you'll hear from their site supervisor, too. Should be good to start this week. He hung up before I could ask anything else. That was Scott. Efficient. The paperwork came through that afternoon. Standard contractor agreement, liability waiver, direct deposit form. I filled it out and sent it back. 2 hours later, I got an email from Kelsey Hansen. Subject, CC Site 744R onboarding Clyde. Contractor access approved for Site 744R effective immediately. Attached, access codes, equipment overview, and nightly checklist. Site is unmanned. Overnight presence required 2200-0600. Keypad code for equipment shelter is 4739. Do not share. Report issues via the contact line in the attachment. No direct calls. Kelsey Hansen, Site Operations Supervisor. That was it. No welcome, no training schedule, no safety briefing. Just codes and a checklist. I opened the attachment. The checklist was 1 page, 12 line items. check generator fuel level, confirm HVAC operation, log interior temperature, verify microwave dish alignment. Most of it was just writing down numbers from screens and making sure lights were green instead of red. The equipment overview was 3 paragraphs of technical specs I didn't need. The access codes were a list: front gate, equipment shelter, backup panel. All 4-digit pins. I figured it was some kind of desperate placement. They needed a warm body on site overnight and didn't want to pay for someone qualified. That worked fine for me. I wasn't qualified for much anymore. I drove out the next night just to see the site before my first real shift. Burnsville was an hour and a half east, small mountain town with a main street and not much else. I stopped for gas at a kangaroo station on the edge of town. The clerk, an older woman with deep lines around her mouth, rang me up without a word. I grabbed a coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since morning and got back on the road. The directions Kelsey sent took me north on Highway 19, then onto a Forest Service road that curved up into the hills. The road narrowed after the first mile. Pavement turned to gravel, then to dirt with grass growing in the center. No streetlights, no houses, just trees pressing in on both sides and my headlights cutting a tunnel through the dark. The site was another 3 miles up. I almost missed the turnoff. Just a gap in the trees with a gravel pad and a chain-link fence about 8 feet tall. The gate had a keypad lock. Beyond it I could see the tower, maybe 100 feet tall, red lights blinking at the top. At the base was a small rectangular shelter, metal siding painted gray, one door with another keypad. I didn't get out. Just idled there for a minute, looking at it. The place hummed, low and constant, like the electrical buzz you hear near power lines. Probably the equipment inside keeping cool, fans running all night. It looked exactly like what Scott said. A relay site. Nothing special. I put the truck in reverse and headed back down. My first real shift started at 10 p.m. on a Thursday. I packed light. Thermos of coffee, a sandwich, my phone charger, and a flashlight, even though the checklist said the shelter had interior lights. I wore my old work boots and a utility jacket with enough pockets for the stuff I'd need. The drive up felt longer in full dark. No moon that night. The Forest Service road was worse than I remembered, rutted deep in a few spots where runoff had cut through. I took it slow. The last thing I needed was to bottom out and spend the night waiting for a tow. The gate was right where I'd seen it before. I punched in the code Kelsey sent, 7231, and the lock clicked open. I drove through, then got out to close it behind me. Protocol, probably. Keep randos out. The pad was gravel, flat and wide enough for 2 vehicles. The tower stood in the center, thick steel legs bolted into concrete footings. Up top, I could see the microwave dishes, pointed east and west. The shelter sat off to one side, maybe 12 feet long and 8 feet wide. No windows, just the one door and a vent on the roof. The hum was louder here. Not just electrical anymore, mechanical too. Something inside grinding away. I grabbed my bag and walked to the shelter door. The keypad was mounted on the right side, weathered plastic with numbers worn smooth. I punched in 4739. The lock buzzed and clicked. I pulled the door open. Inside was bright. LED strips on the ceiling, white and sterile. The space was narrow, just a center aisle with equipment racks on both sides. Servers, maybe, or relay boxes. Lots of blinking lights, green and amber. A few red ones scattered in. The air was cool and dry, humming with the sound of fans. At the far end was a small desk, metal folding chair, a clipboard hanging on a hook. I stepped inside and let the door close behind me. It locked automatically. That was it. I was in. I pulled onto the gravel pad and killed the engine. The hum was louder now. Not just electrical anymore, mechanical too. Something running constant inside that metal box. I grabbed my bag and stepped out. Cold air hit me first. Probably mid-30s. The kind that gets into your jacket and sits there. I shut the truck door and walked toward the shelter. My boots crunched on the gravel. That was the only other sound besides the hum. The keypad looked worse up close. Plastic housing cracked at the corner. Numbers worn smooth from whoever worked here before me. I punched in 4739 and the lock buzzed, then clicked. I pulled the door open. The hum doubled. White LED strips on the ceiling made everything sharp and bright. Equipment racks lined both walls with maybe 2 feet of space down the middle. Blinking lights everywhere. Green mostly. A few amber. The air smelled like warm electronics and dust and something else. Oil, maybe. Or just old metal. I stepped inside and let the door close behind me. The mechanical noise came from a big HVAC unit mounted near the back. That and cooling fans in the racks. The whole place felt alive. Not in a creepy way. Just constant. Like standing inside something that never stopped working. The setup was bare bones. A folding cot pushed against the back wall under the HVAC unit. Thin green pad on top. No pillow. A small electric space heater sitting on the floor near the cot. The kind with fake coils that glow orange. And a cheap coffee maker on a plywood shelf someone had bolted to the wall. The kind you see at yard sales for $5. That was it. No chair, no desk. Just enough to survive a night if you didn't mind sitting on a cot or standing the whole time. I set my bag down on the cot and looked around. The equipment racks had labels on them, but most were faded or peeling off. One said, "Microwave Relay" in black marker. Another said, "Coax Cabinet" with an arrow pointing down. I didn't touch anything yet. Just scanned. Then I saw the paper. It was taped above the breaker panel on the right wall. White printer paper, 5 lines in huge capital letters, black ink, looked fresh. I stepped closer and read it. Keep floodlights on all night. Wear grounding strap on left ankle. Do not transmit or respond on radio channel 3 after 1:11 a.m. If tapping comes from coax cabinet, cut main power for 60 seconds. Do not open door if keypad chirps 2 quick beeps. I read it twice. Then I stood there staring at it for a minute. It felt like a hazing prank. The kind guys pull on the new hire, scare them with fake rules, see if they call the supervisor freaking out. I'd seen it before in warehouse jobs. Someone tapes a sign that says, "Don't look in the freezer after midnight," or something equally dumb. Everyone has a laugh when the new guy asks about it. This had that vibe, specific enough to sound real. Weird enough to make you second guess. The 1:11 a.m. detail especially. That's the kind of thing someone adds to make it believable. I pulled out my phone and checked the email from Kelsey again. The checklist she sent had 12 items. Standard stuff. Generator fuel, HVAC temps, indicator lights. Nothing about grounding straps or radio silence or cutting power. So either this paper was a joke, or someone added rules after Kelsey sent the official list. I figured I'd ignore it, do the actual checklist. Keep my head down, collect the paycheck. I unzipped my bag and pulled out the thermos, poured some coffee into the lid. It was still hot. I took a sip and started looking for the grounding strap just in case. Took me about 30 seconds to find it. A black elastic band with a metal clip and a wire running to a grounding post bolted into the floor. It was sitting on top of the breaker panel, right under the paper. I picked it up. Standard anti-static gear. The kind you wear when working on sensitive electronics. I'd used them before during a brief IT support gig that lasted maybe 3 weeks. I looked at the strap, looked at the paper, looked at the equipment racks. The thing was, the strap made sense if I was opening panels or touching circuit boards. But the checklist didn't mention that. Just logging numbers and confirming lights. No hands-on work. Still, wearing it wouldn't hurt anything. And if this place had some weird safety protocol I didn't know about, I wasn't going to get fired on night 1 for skipping it. I sat down on the cot and strapped it around my left ankle. Tightened it until it was snug. The wire ran maybe 6 feet to the grounding post. Enough slack to move around, but not enough to reach the door. That bugged me a little. I stood and tested it. I could reach the breaker panel, the coffee maker, most of the equipment racks, but not the door. If I wanted to step outside, I'd have to take it off first. Probably fine. I sat back down and checked the time on my phone. 10:32 p.m. The checklist said to log readings every hour starting at 11. That gave me about half an hour to get familiar with the layout. I stood again and started walking the narrow aisle. The grounding strap wire dragged behind me. The first rack on the left had a digital display showing temperature, 71 degrees, green light next to it. The second rack had no display, just a mesh panel with fans running behind it, hot air blowing out the top. The third rack was labeled Coax Cabinet in faded red letters. I stopped. That was the one mentioned on the paper, the tapping thing. I leaned closer. It was just a metal cabinet with a latch. No window, no display. I put my hand near it, felt vibration, faint but constant. Probably from the fans or the equipment inside. No tapping. I moved on. The breaker panel was at the back right corner. Standard commercial setup, 30 or 40 switches, most labeled HVAC, lights, relay A, relay B, exterior floods. I found the main breaker at the top. Big red switch. The kind you flip during an emergency shutdown. I didn't touch it. Next to the breaker panel was a small handheld radio sitting in a charging dock. Black plastic, Motorola. The kind construction crews use. The display showed channel 1 and a full battery. I picked it up, felt solid, a little heavier than I expected. I turned the dial and cycled through the channels. 1 through 16. No static. No voices, just dead air on every channel. I stopped on channel 3. Nothing. I switched it back to channel 1 and set it in the dock. The clock on the HVAC display said 10:41. I poured more coffee and sat on the cot. My back was already starting to tighten from the drive. I shifted and leaned against the wall. The metal was cold through my jacket. This was going to be a long night. I pulled out my phone and opened a browser. No signal. Not even one bar. I'd expected that. Remote site. Middle of nowhere. Probably no cell tower for miles. I closed the browser and just sat there, listening to the hum, watching the blinking lights. At 11, I stood and started the checklist. Generator fuel was first. I found the gauge on a rack near the door, 3/4 full. I wrote it down on the log sheet clipped to the wall. Then HVAC temps, 71 intake, 68 exhaust. Then indicator lights. All green except one amber on relay B. The checklist said amber was normal during low traffic periods. I finished the first round by 11:14. Sat back down, poured more coffee. At 12:47 a.m. the radio crackled. I looked up. It was still in the charging dock. I hadn't touched it since 10:41. The display lit up. The channel number changed, switched from 1 to 3, just flipped on its own. I stood and walked over. The grounding strap wire pulled tight. I reached the radio and picked it up. Channel 3. No static. No voice. Just open air. I turned the dial back to channel 1. It flipped to 3 again. By itself. I stared at it. My first thought was malfunction. Electrical interference. Something in the racks sending a signal that triggered the channel switch. That happened sometimes with cheap radios near high-power equipment. My second thought was the paper. Do not transmit or respond on radio channel 3. After 1:11 a.m., it was 12:48 now. 23 minutes until 1:11. I looked at the paper again, then at the radio, then at the clock. I didn't believe in hazing pranks that required equipment to malfunction at specific times. That was too much setup, and this radio switching channels on its own twice in a row wasn't random. I pressed the power button and held it. The display went dark. I set the radio face down in the dock and stepped back. The clock on the HVAC display ticked over to 12:49. 22 minutes until 1:11. I sat on the cot, and kept my eyes on the radio. It stayed off. The hum kept going, the lights kept blinking, and the clock kept sliding forward. I sat there with the radio face down on the cot beside me and watched the HVAC display click forward. 12:51, 12:52. The grounding strap pulled against my ankle when I shifted weight. My back didn't like sitting still that long, but I wasn't about to stand up and pace around. Not right then. The hum from the equipment racks stayed constant. Fans blew hot air through the mesh panels. Nothing changed except the minutes ticking over on the display. 12:58. I poured more coffee from the thermos. It was lukewarm by then, but I drank it anyway. My hands were steady. That was good. I used to check that during bad calls back when I worked ambulance. Quick glance at my own hands to make sure the adrenaline wasn't shaking them yet. Old habit. 103. The floodlights outside threw hard white light through the gap at the bottom of the door. I could see the edge of it cutting across the floor near my boots. The light didn't waver, just sat there steady and bright, lighting up the gravel pad and the base of the tower and probably a good 20 feet into the trees. 107. I thought about the paper taped above the breaker panel. 5 rules. The grounding strap was already handled. The radio was off and sitting next to me. I hadn't opened the door since I came in. That left 2 rules I hadn't tested yet. The tapping one and the channel 3 thing. The floodlights flickered, just once. A quick dip like a brownout, then back to full brightness. I sat up straighter and looked at the door. The light underneath stayed steady again. 109 on the display. The floodlights flickered again. Longer this time. Maybe a full second of dim before they came back up. I stood and walked to the breaker panel, the grounding strap wire dragging behind me. All the switches were in the on position. Nothing had moved. The label next to the exterior flood switch was faded but readable. 110. The lights steadied. No more flickers. I stayed at the breaker panel and watched the display tick over. 111. The keypad chirped. 2 quick beeps, high-pitched electronic sound, the kind a card reader makes when you swipe wrong at a gas pump. I turned and looked at the door. It was maybe 6 feet away from me. The keypad was mounted on the outside so I couldn't see it, but I could hear it fine. I didn't move. The grounding strap wouldn't reach the door anyway. I'd have to unclip it first. Wind pushed through the trees outside. I could hear branches scraping against each other, that dry winter sound. The hum from the racks kept going underneath it. The HVAC cycled on with a soft click and started blowing. Then I heard something heavier on the gravel. Not wind, not branches. Footsteps, slow ones. The kind of sound boots make when someone's trying to walk quiet, but gravel doesn't cooperate. Each step crunched a little despite the care. I stayed where I was and kept my eyes on the door. The light underneath didn't change. No shadow broke across it. The footsteps moved from left to right, maybe 10 feet out from the shelter, pacing or circling. The keypad chirped again. Same 2 beeps. I didn't reach for the door. The paper said, "Don't open it if the keypad chirps 2 quick beeps," and I wasn't about to test whether that was a prank or not. Nothing about this felt like a prank anymore. The footsteps stopped. I waited. My pulse was up, but my breathing stayed even. Another old reflex. You don't hyperventilate on a bad call. You keep your air steady and your head clear, and you do the next thing on the list. Right then, the next thing on the list was standing still and not opening the door. The radio turned on by itself. I heard the click first, then saw the glow. It was still sitting face down on the cot where I'd left it, but the light from the display bled out around the edges. Then static poured out of the speaker. Loud. Way louder than it should have been for a handheld unit. I walked back to the cot, the grounding strap pulling the whole way. The wire had just enough slack. I picked up the radio and flipped it over. Channel 3. Display lit up green. The static wasn't random. There was a rhythm underneath it, a cadence. broken pieces of sound that almost shaped into words. A voice maybe, or something that used to be a voice, buried under interference. I knew that rhythm. Dispatch cadence. The same pattern I used to hear 100 times a shift back in Knoxville. Controlled, professional, clipped phrasing with pauses for response. My thumb moved toward the transmit button before I caught myself. Old reflex. When dispatch calls, you answer. You confirm the address. You acknowledge the code. You don't leave them hanging. But this wasn't dispatch. And the rule said do not transmit or respond on radio channel 3 after 1:11 a.m. I pulled my thumb back and pressed the power button instead. Held it down until the display went dark and the static cut off. The silence after was worse than the noise. I shoved the radio under the cot and pushed it back against the wall. Out of reach, out of sight. The keypad chirped again. 2 beeps, third time. I checked the HVAC display. 1:14. The footsteps started again outside. Same slow crunch on gravel. Same pacing sound, left to right, then back again. Deliberate. I sat back down on the cot and kept my eyes on the door. The light underneath still hadn't changed. No shadow, just white floodlight spilling across the floor. 1:16. The footsteps stopped again. 1:17. I heard wind, just wind. The hum from the racks, my own breathing. 1:18. The floodlights died. Not a flicker this time. Just gone. Full dark outside. And the light that had been cutting under the door disappeared completely. I didn't move. The LEDs inside the shelter still worked fine. White ceiling strips and green blinking indicators and the glow from the HVAC display. But outside was black now. Then the tapping started. It came from the Coke's cabinet. Third rack on the left, the one I'd checked earlier. The one with faded red letters and constant vibration. Tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, patterned, deliberate, not random vibration, not a loose part rattling from the fans. Tapping. I stood up and walked over to it. The grounding strap wire scraped along the floor behind me. I stopped in front of the cabinet and leaned close. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. It was coming from inside the metal housing, somewhere behind the mesh panel. Something small and hard hitting the interior wall with rhythm, with intention. The paper said if tapping comes from the Coke's cabinet, cut main power for 60 seconds. I looked back at the breaker panel, the big red switch at the top. The tapping continued. Same pattern, same deliberate spacing. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. I kept standing there and listening, and I didn't reach for the breaker yet. I leaned closer to the Coke's cabinet. The tapping kept going. Tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 pause. And I put my hand flat against the mesh panel. The vibration traveled straight through the metal into my palm. Small and hard, whatever was doing it. Regular. Intentional. I shifted my weight and pressed my jaw against the cabinet frame. An old trick from my EMT days when I needed to feel a patient's pulse through thick winter gear. The tapping came through clearer that way. Not just surface contact anymore. I could feel it deeper. The vibration running through the metal housing and into the bone of my jaw. It wasn't just hitting the inside wall of the cabinet. It was moving. The pattern shifted. Still rhythmic, still deliberate. But the source was traveling. Up and to the right, following something I couldn't see. I pulled back an inch and traced my eyes along the Coke's lines running from the cabinet into the ceiling conduit. The vibration tracked that route. Up the line, like something was climbing. That was enough for me. I turned and walked straight to the breaker panel, the grounding strap wire scraping behind me on the concrete floor. My hands were steady. That surprised me a little, but I didn't think about it. The big red switch sat at the top of the panel, labeled Main, in faded white letters. The rule had said cut main power for 60 seconds. I didn't know why. Didn't matter. It was procedure now, same as checking airway breathing circulation before moving a trauma patient. You follow the steps, because the steps keep you alive. I grabbed the switch and pulled it down. The hum died instantly. All of it. The HVAC unit clicked off mid-cycle with a mechanical sigh. The cooling fans in the racks spun down in 2 seconds, their whine dropping through lower and lower pitches until they stopped. The LED ceiling strips went dark. The green and amber indicator lights on every rack blinked out. The space heater near the cot made a soft click as its element went cold. The only light left was the faint glow from my phone screen in my jacket pocket, dim enough that it barely lit the fabric. I pulled it out and checked the time. 1:17 a.m. I set the phone face up on top of the breaker panel and started counting. 1, 2, 3. The silence was wrong, not complete. I could still hear wind outside, branches scraping against each other in the woods past the fence. I could hear my own breathing. But the background hum I'd been hearing since I first arrived, the electrical hum, the mechanical hum, the constant white noise of active equipment, was gone. It left a gap. The kind of silence you get in a building that's been abandoned for years, not in a site that's supposed to be running critical infrastructure 24/7. 15, 16, 17. The grounding strap was still clipped to my ankle. I didn't know if it mattered with the power off, but I didn't touch it. My back was pressed against the wall next to the breaker panel. I kept my eyes on the door. The gap at the bottom was black now. No floodlights outside, no glow from the gate or the tower. Just black. 31, 32, 33. My phone screen dimmed to save battery. I tapped it to keep the light going. The blue glow lit up my hands, the breaker panel, the first few feet of the aisle. Everything past that was shadow. I could barely make out the Coke's cabinet. No tapping anymore. No vibration. Whatever had been moving through the lines had either stopped or I couldn't hear it without the metal conducting sound to my jaw. 48, 49, 50. Something slammed into the door. The whole frame rattled. The metal skin of the shelter buckled inward an inch where the impact hit, then popped back out with a flat bang that echoed in the dark. I didn't move, didn't flinch. My heart kicked up, but my hands stayed still. I kept counting. 51, 52. Another slam. Same spot. The door frame held, but I heard the bolts creak in the housing. This wasn't wind. Wind doesn't hit twice in the same place with that kind of focus. 53, 54, 55. I looked at the gap under the door. Still black. Not the normal black you get outside at night on a gravel pad with trees and sky and distance. This was flat. Absent. The kind of black you see on a screen that's turned off, or in a room with no windows and the lights killed. It didn't make sense. There should have been some light. Starlight, maybe. Cloud reflection. Something. 56, 57, 58. The door rattled again, but no impact this time. Just vibration, the metal shivering in its frame. I watched the handle. It didn't turn. 59. 60. I grabbed the main breaker and shoved it back up. The hum returned all at once, a rising wall of sound as the HVAC kicked on and the cooling fans spun back up to speed. The LED ceiling strips flickered twice, then held steady, flooding the aisle with white light. The indicator lights on the racks blinked green and amber in sequence as the equipment cycled through startup. The space heater clicked and started ticking as the element heated. The floodlights outside snapped on. I could see the gap under the door again. White light, bright and clean, spilling across the concrete pad outside. The gravel, the base of the tower. Everything looked normal. I walked toward the door, the grounding strap wire dragging behind me, and stopped 2 feet short. I didn't have enough slack to reach the door itself, but I could see through the narrow vertical window set into the frame. Just a strip of reinforced glass, 4 inches wide, running from shoulder height to about waist level. I leaned close and looked out. The chain-link fence was 30 feet away, same as it had been when I'd driven in. 8 feet tall, topped with 3 strands of barbed wire angled outward. The gate was closed. The gravel pad was empty, except for my truck. The figure stood just past the fence line on the other side. Roughly human height, maybe 6 feet, hard to tell from this distance and angle. It had the shape of someone wearing a coat. Long, dark, heavy fabric that hung down past where knees should be. But the proportions were wrong. The head sat too far forward on the shoulders. The shoulders themselves were uneven, one higher than the other by 3 or 4 inches. The arms were too long, or the torso was too short. Something about the geometry didn't line up. It wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the shelter. I watched it for 5 seconds, 10. It didn't sway, didn't shift weight, didn't do any of the small movements a person makes when they're standing still. It was perfectly motionless in a way that living things aren't. Then it raised one arm and pressed a hand to the fence. The chain link deformed inward, not like something pushing hard against tension, like the metal softened. The diamond-shaped gaps in the wire stretched and warped, the steel bending without resistance, curving inward in a smooth arc around the hand. No sound, no scrape or creak, just silent deformation. I stepped back from the window. My phone was still on the breaker panel. I didn't reach for it. The grounding strap pulled tight as I backed up another foot. The radio crackled. It was still under the cot where I'd shoved it. I could see the green glow of its display lighting up the shadows under the frame. Channel 3. The static was loud, sharp bursts cutting through the hum of the equipment fans. Then a voice came through. Broken up, distorted, but recognizable as speech. It said my name. Clyde Griffith. Pronounced wrong. The first name came out flat. Both syllables of the same weight. The last name had the stress on the wrong part. Griffith instead of Griffith. It sounded like someone reading it off a form who'd never heard it said out loud before. The static swallowed it again. I stayed where I was, 2 feet from the door, the grounding strap clipped to my ankle and the wire stretching back toward the breaker panel. I kept my eyes on the window, on the figure past the fence, on the hand still pressed to the warped chain link. The radio crackled again, waiting. I reached for my phone on the breaker panel. The screen was still lit from when I tapped it during the countdown. No signal bars. Same as before. Then one bar flickered in, just for half a second. Then gone. I stared at the screen. The bar didn't come back. I tilted the phone, angled it toward the door like that ever actually helps. Nothing. Dead zone again. The phone buzzed in my hand. A text notification. Unknown number. I opened it. Site 744R. Verify exterior relay alignment per updated checklist. Open door and perform visual inspection of dish mounts. Report findings to supervisor line. I read it twice. The formatting looked right. Professional. The kind of after-hours task update I'd gotten before on other contracts when something changed mid-shift. Except I didn't have signal. Hadn't had signal since I arrived. And the text came through anyway. I looked at the timestamp. 1:19 a.m., 2 minutes ago. My thumb hovered over the reply field, then I stopped. Looked at the radio under the cot, still crackling static on channel 3. Looked at the door, the window, the figure outside that had bent chain-link fence with its hand. The rules on the paper said don't transmit or respond on radio channel 3 after 1:11. Don't open door if keypad chirps twice. This wasn't the radio. This was a text. Different transmission method. Different channel entirely. But it was still a response they wanted. I deleted the message without replying. Shoved the phone in my jacket pocket. The rules weren't about protecting me from the equipment. They were about limiting what could reach me, what could get in through a reply, through acknowledgement. through opening the wrong thing at the wrong time. That's what I figured anyway. I wasn't staying to test it. I grabbed my keys off the cot. They were still in my jacket pocket technically, but I checked anyway, patted it down, felt the shape. Then I grabbed the jacket itself and pulled it on over my shirt. The thermos was still on the cot. I left it. The bag too. Didn't need either. I turned toward the door and my shoulder brushed the edge of the equipment rack. My elbow knocked something hard, the radio, not the one under the cot. A second radio. I looked down. It was clipped to my belt. Right side, black Motorola, same model as the one under the cot. I didn't put it there. The static surged, loud, sharp. The green display lit up showing channel 3 and the speaker screamed white noise so loud I felt it in my teeth. I ripped the radio off my belt, the clip snapping free, and threw it across the room toward the back corner where the coffee maker sat on the plywood shelf. It hit the wall, bounced, landed in the small metal sink bolted next to the shelf. The hissing continued. Same volume, same static. The radio sat in the sink facing up, display glowing, speaker vibrating against the metal basin. I looked at the door. The keypad outside. It hadn't chirped, not since 1:11. That was 8 minutes ago. The rule said, don't open the door if the keypad chirps 2 quick beeps. It didn't say don't open it ever, just not when it chirps. The keypad was silent now. I walked to the door. The grounding strap dragged behind me. I stopped 1 foot short, reached down, unclipped the strap from my ankle, tossed it back toward the breaker panel. It hit the floor with a metal scrape. I punched in the code, 4739. The lock buzzed, clicked. I pulled the door open. The air outside hit me first. Cold, mid-30s maybe, but it smelled wrong, like heated plastic. The kind of smell you get when a power strip overloads. Sharp, chemical. It didn't belong out here in the woods. The floodlights were on. I could see them. 4 tall poles mounted around the perimeter of the fence, same as when I'd arrived. White halogen bulbs. Bright as hell earlier. But now they looked weak, dim. Like the beams were stopping 10 feet out and just dissolving. Not fading, stopping. The light didn't reach the fence. Didn't reach the tree line. Just ended. I stepped onto the concrete pad outside the door. My truck sat 20 feet away on the gravel, same spot I'd parked it. Driver's door facing me. The windshield was fogged. From the inside, I hadn't left the heat on, hadn't left anything on, and it was cold enough tonight that condensation should have formed on the outside if it formed at all. Not the inside. Not unless something warm had been sitting in the cab breathing. I took another step. Gravel crunched under my boot. My left ankle jerked back. Hard. I stumbled, looked down. The grounding strap, still clipped to my ankle. I'd unclipped it. I'd thrown it toward the breaker panel. But the wire was pulled tight, stretched back to the metal stud mounted near the doorframe. The clip was fastened around my boot above the ankle, tight. Same as before. I didn't stop to think about it. I bent down, ripped the clip open with both hands, and pulled it off my ankle. Threw it behind me. It clattered on concrete. Then I ran, straight toward the truck, keys already in my hand, 20 feet, 15. My boots hit gravel and it scattered under me. 10 feet. I could see the door handle, could see the fogged windshield and the shape behind it. Not a shape. A shadow. Movement. 5 feet. The tower beacon blinked, red light at the top of the lattice. It blinked every 4 seconds. Regular FAA pattern. I'd counted it earlier. This blink was different. The forest noise cut out, not faded, cut. Like someone had thrown a switch. The wind, the branches, the distant creak of trees. Gone. Replaced by a clean test tone. Single frequency. Steady. The kind of tone they use for emergency broadcast tests. I stopped running, halfway across the gravel pad, halfway between the shelter and my truck. I looked at my feet. A shadow stretched across my boots. Long, thin, wrong proportions. The head too far forward, one shoulder higher than the other, arms too long. It stretched from behind me. I turned my head, started to look back toward the fence, toward where the figure had been standing when I'd looked through the window. The fence was empty. The shadow moved, shifted. The arm lifted. I bolted back toward the shelter. Didn't think, didn't plan it, just moved. My boots hit gravel, then concrete. The door was still open, interior lights still on, the radio still hissing in the sink. The rules were taped to the wall. The grounding strap was on the floor. It was the only place the rules had actually worked. I ran inside. I slammed the door and punched the code in backwards first. Had to try again. 4739. The lock buzzed and I heard it click shut from inside. I stood there on the concrete pad breathing hard, looking at my truck with the fogged windshield, then back at the door. The grounding strap was gone from my ankle. I checked. Nothing there. I'd ripped it off and thrown it, watched it clatter on the concrete, but now it wasn't on the ground either. I pulled the door handle. Locked. Good. I went back inside. The strap was clipped to my left ankle again. I didn't touch it this time. Just stood there next to the breaker panel looking at the thing fastened around my boot, the wire running back to the grounding post like it had never moved. My hands were shaking a little. Not much. Enough that I noticed. I forced my thinking into procedures. That's what I had. The power cycle had stopped the tapping the first time, but it also brought whatever was outside closer. The figure at the fence, the hand bending the chain link, the voice on the radio saying my name wrong. So I wasn't doing that again. Restoring normal operation wasn't the answer. I needed a different option. The rules had worked so far. The grounding strap kept reattaching itself, which probably meant I was supposed to keep wearing it whether I wanted to or not. The radio kept switching to channel 3, the keypad kept chirping, the door kept being a problem. All of it lined up with what was written on that paper taped above the breaker panel. But the paper didn't say what to do if none of it stopped. I walked back to the cot and sat down, pulling my phone out. No signal. The earlier text from the unknown number was gone from my message history, like I'd never received it. I opened my email and scrolled back to the onboarding message from Kelsey. Most of it was the checklist and access codes, but there was a line at the bottom I'd skimmed the first time. Something about emergency equipment. I found it. Spare components stored under cot. Backup relay module, cable crimper set, exothermic weld kit, 2 units. Use only per regional tech authorization. Exothermic weld kit. I'd seen those before, not often. Once on a job site in Knoxville where they were running ground cables for a hospital generator install. Heavy-duty stuff. Thermite reaction. You used it to fuse thick copper lines when a regular splice wouldn't handle the load or the environment. It burned white hot and melted metal in seconds. I got down on my knees and looked under the cot. The grounding strap wire scraped across the floor as I moved. There were 2 cardboard boxes shoved against the wall, one long and flat, one smaller. I pulled the smaller one out. Red plastic case about the size of a tackle box, with a printed label that said Cadweld Exothermic Welding Kit in black letters. I popped the latches and opened it. Inside was a ceramic mold in 2 halves, a bag of gray powder that had to be the thermite charge, a flint ignition strip, clamps, and an instruction sheet in a plastic sleeve. The mold was meant for heavy cable. I could see the channel shape molded into the ceramic, thick round profile, probably 8 gauge or bigger. The coax lines running up from the cabinet into the ceiling conduit were at least that thick, maybe thicker. I closed the case and set it on the cot next to me. The tapping started again. It came from the coax cabinet, same as before, but faster this time, harder. The rhythm was gone. It wasn't tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap anymore. It was just rapid hammering, like something trying to break through from the inside. I could hear it clearly over the HVAC hum and the cooling fans. I stood up and walked over to the cabinet, the grounding strap dragging behind me. I put my hand on the mesh panel. The vibration rattled my palm. Whatever was in there was hitting the metal housing hard enough that I could feel the impacts travel up my arm. I turned and walked back to the breaker panel. I grabbed the main switch and pulled it down. Everything cut out. HVAC, fans, lights, all of it. I left it off this time. The tapping stopped instantly. Just gone. The silence was complete except for wind outside and my own breathing. I picked up my phone from the breaker panel and turned on the flashlight. The beam was narrow and bright, cutting across the dark equipment racks and throwing long shadows on the back wall. I walked over to the Cokes cabinet and stopped in front of it. The faded red letters were barely visible in the phone light. I reached for the latch on the cabinet door. It was a simple rotating cam lock, the kind you could open with a quarter. I twisted it counterclockwise and the door swung open on cheap hinges. Inside were 5 Cokes lines running vertically, bundled together with zip ties every foot or so. They entered through a grommet at the bottom of the cabinet and exited through another grommet at the top, feeding into the ceiling conduit. The lines were thick black cable with weatherproof sheathing. No labels, no markings, just the cables and a small junction box mounted to the cabinet wall with 2 green indicator LEDs that were dark now with the power off. I leaned in close and shone the light up and down the lines. Nothing was moving, no tapping, no vibration. It was like opening the cabinet had been permission, access granted. I didn't like that. I walked back to the cot and grabbed the red case, then returned to the cabinet. I set the case on the floor and opened it, pulling out the ceramic mold and the clamps. The mold was heavier than I expected, dense and cold. I fit the 2 halves together and checked the channel. It'd work. The thickest Cokes line would fit in there with maybe a 1/4 inch of clearance. I selected the center cable. It was slightly thicker than the others and positioned where the bundle entered the cabinet from below. I pulled a zip tie loose and separated it from the other 4 lines, bending it toward me to create slack. Outside, the keypad chirped twice. 2 quick electronic beeps. I stopped moving, stayed exactly where I was, kneeling in front of the open cabinet with the Cokes line in one hand and the mold in the other. The grounding strap wire was stretched behind me, still attached to my ankle, pulling just slightly. The keypad didn't chirp again. I positioned the ceramic mold around the Cokes line about 6 inches above where it entered through the bottom grommet. I clamped the 2 halves together and tightened the clamps until the mold was secure and couldn't shift. Then I opened the bag of thermite powder and poured it into the top of the mold, filling the cavity. The powder was fine and gray, almost like ash. I used the whole bag. I pulled the flint ignition strip from the case. It was a simple striker, the kind that throws sparks when you scrape it. The instructions said to insert it into the powder at a 45-degree angle and strike downward. I did that. Pushed the striker into the thermite and held it ready. The keypad chirped twice again. Same pattern. 2 quick beeps. I stayed put. Didn't go near the door, didn't look at the window. I kept my eyes on the mold and the ignition strip. I scraped the striker down hard. Sparks hit the powder and it caught immediately. White light flared up, bright enough that I had to turn my head and close my eyes. The heat came half a second later. A wave of it that felt like opening an oven directly in front of my face. I backed up fast, the grounding strap wire scraping across the floor, and shielded my face with my forearm. The thermite burned with a hissing roar, white and yellow and too bright to look at directly. I could see the glow through my eyelids. Molten metal started pouring out of the bottom of the mold, dripping onto the cabinet floor in glowing orange drops that hissed and spat when they hit. The Cokes line sagged. The sheathing melted first, curling back and releasing a sharp chemical smell. Then the inner conductor started to fail. It broke. The cable separated clean, the 2 ends drooping away from each other, and molten copper kept dripping from the mold onto the cabinet floor. Right after it broke, the radio under the cot made a sound. Not static, not a voice. A tearing sound like metal ripping or feedback screaming through a blown speaker. It was loud enough that I heard it clearly over the thermite burn. Then it cut off. I looked over at the cot. The radio's green display was still glowing under the frame, but the sound was gone. I turned back to the cabinet. The thermite was still burning, but the white light was fading to orange. The remaining 4 coax lines were quivering, not from vibration, not from airflow. They were moving on their own, twisting slightly inside the zip ties like something was trying to pass through them and couldn't anymore. Then they stopped. Something slammed into the shelter wall from outside. Not the door this time. The left wall, about halfway down near the second equipment rack. The metal skin buckled inward with a loud bang, then popped back out. Another slam hit the same spot, then another. The impacts were rhythmic and hard, each one louder than the last. I counted 6 hits, then 7, then it stopped. The keypad went silent. No chirps, no beeps. The pressure in the room changed. I felt it in my ears, a faint pop like altitude shift, and then everything normalized. The air didn't smell like heated plastic anymore, just burnt metal and melted insulation. The thermite stopped burning. The mold was still glowing orange, too hot to touch, but the reaction was done. I stood up and walked back to the breaker panel, grabbed the main switch, and pushed it back up. Power returned. HVAC kicked on, fans spun up, LEDs flickered and held. I checked the coax cabinet. The severed cable hung in 2 pieces, the ends blackened and fused. The other 4 lines were motionless. I closed the cabinet door and latched it. Then I sat on the cot and waited for dawn. It came slow. I watched the gap under the door go from black to deep blue to gray. At 6:11 a.m., according to the HVAC display, I unclipped the grounding strap from my ankle and left it on the floor. I grabbed my thermos and bag, shoved my phone in my pocket, and walked to the door. I punched in the code. The lock buzzed. I opened the door. The tower was dead. No floodlights, no red beacon at the top. The whole site was dark and still, just a lattice frame and a metal shelter sitting in the woods under early morning light. My truck was right where I'd left it, windshield clear now, no fog. I walked over to the fence and looked at the chain link. No deformation. The metal was straight and intact, the diamond gaps evenly spaced. The barbed wire angled outward at the top in 3 clean strands. I ran my hand along the section where I'd seen the figure press its hand through. Nothing. Just cold steel. I walked back to my truck and got in. The cab smelled normal. Nothing had been inside. I started the engine and it turned over fine. I didn't drive up to the gate. I put it in reverse and backed down the access road all the way to the Forest Service Road, then turned around and drove down to the main highway. I didn't trust the truck until I was back on pavement with other vehicles around me. I stopped at a Holiday gas station in Marion, about 20 minutes past Burnsville. It was full daylight by then, maybe 7:30. I went inside and grabbed coffee and a prepackaged sandwich from the cooler. The clerk at the register was a younger woman with auburn hair tied back and a name tag that said Judith. She rang me up without comment, her voice friendly and even. 12:47, she said. I paid cash and left. I drove home and slept for 4 hours. When I woke up, it was early afternoon and I had an email from Kelsey Hansen. The subject line was Site 744R, Service Interruption. I opened it. Clyde, Regional Monitoring shows Site 744R went dark at 01:26 and has not restored. No alarms received. Explain outage and provide estimated restoration time per standard reporting protocol. I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop. I didn't respond. I found a padded envelope in my kitchen drawer and put the shelter keys inside. I grabbed the grounding strap from my bag where I'd shoved it that morning and clipped it to the key ring, the wire coiled around the metal post. I sealed the envelope, wrote Kelsey's name and the Crown Castle regional office address on the front, and walked it down to the post office. Mailed it without a return address. That evening, I powered my phone off and left it off. I figured destroying the coax line had cut the connection, the thing that had learned my name, that had tried to pull me through the radio, through the text, through the door. Cutting the thickest cable at the entry point had severed it. I was banking on that. I left the phone off all night and didn't turn it back on until the next morning.